Hello and welcome to designTimber 2025. So my name's Liam McAndrew. I'm the head of digital and content for TDUK, not your usual host, is stepping in today, but I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. So this is the fourth in our designTimber webinars, which provide a platform to learn, engage directly from the multidisciplinary teams behind the incredible timber projects who were winners from last year's Water Awards 2024. The presentation today will focus on an innovative project that pushes the use of homegrown timber and bespoke modular construction. While people are still joining, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk you through Timber Development UK, what we do, who we are. It's going to go next slide. So TDUK was formed in 2021 from the merger of Trada and the Timber Trade Federation. We represent everyone in the timber supply chain, so all the way from forests, sawmills, through to merchants, and then architects, engineers, specifiers, and everyone in between. So anyone who touches timber can be part of TDUK. We've got three key missions. We aim to connect the supply chain, lead best practice, and accelerate a low carbon future using carbon. One of the key ways we do this is actually these designTimber webinar series, where we connect people from across the UK with the very best of timber construction. So very, very lucky to sort of have these people joining us today. Go through. Just a quick couple notes that these features winners from last year's Water Awards 2024. The Water Awards deadline actually closes in 2 days' time. So please enter if you have a really innovative, cool timber building. You can enter up until Friday, 30 May 2025. So really recommend doing that. And there's another mention. If you are enjoying our events, we do have our upcoming UK Timber Design Conference on the 3rd of July in London. I think it's about 2/3 of the way sold out already. It sold out last year. So if you do want to come, connect in person, network, learn about the really cool things happening in timber and construction in the UK, please do buy a ticket for that as soon as possible, because if you hold on too long, unfortunately, you might get cut off from that one. As well as sort of webinars and events, we host a big library of information, showcasing, timber knowledge, which has been accumulated both from our members, from partners, and making sure that you guys can reach your maximum potential when it comes to building with timber. You can see a few featured ones. We've got the moisture management during construction, which is put in place by the very knowledgeable Matt Caldwell. So if you want to learn about sort of how to manage the moisture during the construction of your building, it's a really good project. We have a whole lot of case studies, Koto House among them. So definitely make sure to go online and check those out. We have a big knowledge library going through different aspects of building with timber. And we have magazines like Designing Timber and Supplying Timber, showcasing and sharing the news of what's going on in the supply chain. So while many of our resources are available to all, including the webinars, which we again put on for free to connect everyone, because we think these are really important stories to tell. Fundamentally, we are a membership organisation, and our ability to put things on like this counts on people like yourselves coming in, becoming a member, and joining and supporting us to put these on. So if you are considering membership, please do get in touch. And finally, now I'm going to hand over to the speakers from today's webinar, who are going to tell us all about Koto House. So Koto House won the Research and Innovation Award at last year's Wood Awards. It's a really fantastic project made from homegrown timbers, homegrown species, and a really, really cool sort of journey from research, supported by the government, supported by universities, through to finished projects and some really, really cool businesses. So our speakers today are Theo Dales, who is a co-founder of Koto Design, and Dr. Rob Thomas, Director of Hiraeth Architecture. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. I'm not from the UK originally, so my Welsh might not be the best. After a presentation from our speakers, we'll be asked to go to the audience to ask audience questions, about 45 minutes of presentations, 15 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to ask everyone, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A function. So please do make use of this across the webinar. And then at the end, we can have a really insightful conversation to hopefully answer all of your questions. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, which is Theo. So Theo, I'm just going to ask you to start sharing yours when you have a moment.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Liam. Cool, I'm just going to share my screen here. If you give me one tick, and kind of share this. So yeah, this is Koto House, a slightly confusing name. So my company, which I founded with two others, is also called Koto. And the reason the house is called Koto is because the client really liked the name of our company and called the house the same name as ours. It's originally a Finnish word, which means to be cozy at home. And my partner's lived in Scandinavia for a number of years, so that was kind of a big design kind of influence in the founding of our company. So we focus on kind of design-led modular architecture, primarily in hospitality and residential sectors. And this is probably the project with the most amount of kind of complexities and challenges in it. I think one of the conversations we're having before this around the award that we won last year for research and innovation was this is really a kind of a project which is kind of innovation by necessity in terms of how we delivered it. There's not kind of like one, you know, big piece of innovation within it, but there's a huge amount of kind of like problem solving which you work through all the way through the process with this in order to give the client what they wanted. So this is a holiday home for a family. It's based up in the Outer Hebrides on the island called North Uist. And it sits on the edge of a tidal lagoon up there. So it's a small island. This is kind of where it sits. So it's pretty hard to get there. It's a 2-hour boat ride from Uig, and it's got a very limited population. So there's about 1,000 people that live on the island, and typically it's really difficult to build there. There's like limited contractors. There's limited kind of like materials. Everything takes time to come in. But there is what's also interesting there, like really great kind of like community and problem solvers who also live on the island as well. So we were first, and just I'll zoom in as well just to show you kind of where this is. So this is Uig, and we were approached by the client, Ewan and Amy. So they live over in Inverness. Ewan interestingly is an ex-Olympian. He was an Olympic curler. And he now runs an insurance business, and he has kind of insurance offices kind of dotted around the country, and that's how he got to know North Uist and some of the people up there. So he bought this plot of land, originally had planning for a different design, but it was quite traditional, and he wanted something which is a bit more kind of like innovative. And he saw us through our Instagram account, which is how a lot of our kind of work and projects is generated from. So this is the site. It's on the edge of this road here, and you can see here, it's on the edge of this kind of tidal lagoon. So this whole area here basically fills with water twice a day. This is an island of Valet, which is owned by a local landowner. Really interesting story here about kind of cattle grazing, regenerative farming, using natural materials, seaweed. There's a herd of cows which is driven out across this island throughout the year. But really kind of like sort of amazing community of kind of innovative business people that live on this island as well. So we first heard from Ewan, I think it was in the first lockdown around COVID, and he basically called us up and said, I've got this house, which I have designed, I've got a budget for it. Well, everything here is going to take about 2 years to build. Is there anything you can do? I like your designs. How can we kind of potentially look at this project? And one of the first conversations that we had was like, well, what do you want out of the house? And a lot of this, he was like, it's a holiday home. I want a place to retreat. I want to like sit by the fire with the family, get used to the outdoors and kind of experience like this wonderful wild island out there. So I went out I think it was it was the end of 2020. So it was in the second lockdown where construction was still allowed to operate. So I flew out, I live in Belfast, through a series of like small kind of tiny planes to this remote island where no one else was traveling. And this was a site at that time. So they've basically been prepped for the kind of previous scheme. And it's just this amazing kind of beautiful wild landscape, extreme kind of weathers in terms of wind, storm, obviously longer and shorter days than most of the rest of the UK due to its latitude. And yeah, it's quite an amazing kind of place, really. The land is about 11 acres, and it's this area here, which is mainly sort of boggy and peatland. This island as well is also part of the ownership. So this is kind of basically the water comes in and floods along this area here. And so this is a place where they're kind of like kids would go out and play and live there. You and Amy have four children. So this is a really important place for them to spend time away as a family. The landscape as well also kind of like changes a lot throughout the seasons and throughout the year. And as well as the architecture, we also have an interior design and furniture supply company as well. And so we were commissioned to do not just the design of the building, but also all of the interiors and supply all of the furniture and everything that went inside it as well. So this was some of the first sketches. And I think before we kind of get into this, it's also worth talking about Rob and really importantly, another company, Kenton Jones, which is run by Kenton Jones, which is a family kind of joinery main contractor business as well. And so this project is basically kind of pulled together with a series of people working in different sectors. And we'd worked with Kenton on a couple of projects before, and he was really specializing in offsite modular construction. And so modular construction in this is to describe it is building big sections of the building in a factory in large sections and finishing them as completely as you can before they move to their final location. And so in this instance, the largest sections of these that we did were about 12 meters long by 4.2 meters wide by 3.8 meters high. And so what that means is you can have entire rooms which are finished off in the factory before they move to site. And the system which this is based on and the technical design and development of that has been developed by Rob, and he's going to tell you a bit more about that in terms of the overall kind of story as we work through the project. And so our job at Koto, so we're essentially the lead design architects. We worked through the entirety of the project, but mainly our main focus was on up to stage 3, the planning application. And then we worked really closely with Rob's team and with Kenton's team on the technical design, delivery, specification of materials, finishes, and everything else kind of within the building. And so the rough split of our kind of roles were we were kind of responsible for everything sort of visual that you see. And Rob's team were coordinating all of the elements inside the building and also providing design for manufacturer information that would feed directly into Kenton's factory as well. It's worth saying as well about that Kenton's factory is really interesting in terms of where it's based in Wales. And this is really interesting, just to jump back a couple of slides. This is the journey that the building actually had to take. So the building was built here in Welshpool and then had to travel 500 miles and get on a boat to land on the island here. And this is one of the things which is really interesting about innovation and building in sort of more extreme remote environments. So most new houses on this island will take about 2 years to complete. We got this building from a timber frame in the factory to a finished, handed over project in about 6 months. And that's because everything was basically designed off-site, and then the entire building was moved during the process. But with all of that, one of the really important things with this is the design of the building, and essentially embedding the architecture of the project is the bit that we kind of really care about and we're really passionate about. That's how we work through at the start of the project in terms of really understanding clients' needs, briefs, and also kind of baking in the process of being able to modularize this building so we can break it into sections, build it in the factory, and then move it up to the island. So this was the first sketch which we did. And we did this on the island after that first visit. And there's a series of things that we did here with it. So one of the kind of key things for them is that as a family, they wanted this as a holiday home where everyone sits together in one large open space. They didn't want a space with bedrooms where people go away and close doors, and that's a place where people spend a lot of time. So the bedroom spaces were generally a bit smaller, but the main focus went into the actual kind of main living space itself. It's 206 square meters internal floor area, and this building was delivered in 7 pieces. So there's some interesting parts here as well about the land and the site. A lot of it has to do with the prevailing winds, the weather, and this was the first sketch, which was really about organizing the space so that it worked for them. And what we wanted to do was relate it to the landscape. So this angle you see here, 34 degrees, looks out through an inlet. that looks out to the island of Harris, so that's a kind of key viewpoint. And we wanted to create this idea of increasing the feeling of the size of the property through spaces that provide shelter from the wind and the rain and the elements, because the weather changes like within kind of moments, from sort of sunny to snow to sideways rain, which is quite an amazing kind of place to be in. We also as well took a lot of inspiration on sort of materials and the interiors in terms of like the landscape, the colors, tones and textures. And we also worked through this with the kind of planning application as well. So this was an interesting part about, there is a local design guide for the Highlands, which this building does not conform to. But what we did do is form a really close relationship working with the planning office there in terms of designing a building which is really going to fit within its kind of landscape. Along this road, and Koto House sits at the end of it, just down here, there are a series of kind of white buildings. And we really thought that a black building was going to fit way more appropriately and sit better with this overall kind of landscape, partly to do with the peat and the bogs, but also just the colours of the kind of the trees and the landscape. So this is a really kind of key and really simple drawing where we just took these houses and coloured them in black. And this is a really interesting conversation which we started with the planning officers, which is about how these buildings can be more adaptable to the landscape, fit within tree lines, shadows, and really kind of blend away. So within this as well, this kind of picks up on some of the things around the kind of building location. So we do a lot of work always with kind of sun path diagrams, understanding where you are, where the sun moves, prevailing winds, creating kind of little nooks and spaces in and around the building was a really kind of important part of this. And this went through to the kind of the planners. And this was our planning set of drawings, which we did here. So this was one of the original visuals. And again, and apart from this step here, it's pretty much ended up exactly like this. That we'll show some kind of pictures at the end of these types of spaces. But really, this is about a house that is intended to bring you outside more as well. It's like the weather can be wild, and it's a space, it's a building that you want, that hopefully encourage you to kind of step out. It's also been occupied for the last 2 years as well by the family, and like it's really nice that they've given us lots of feedback in terms of that it does do that. They're outside all the time. You know, they're in the sea, they're kind of like running across the land, and it's a great kind of great second home for them. So this is the buildings that's designed here. So we have a 2-story section over here. So this is the main entrance, living room, 1 bedroom. This is a 2-story section. This is then, and this is basically for kind of like kids and guests. This was basically mum and dad's room over on this side. And this is the central kind of living space here, which we broke down into a series of zones with large kind of window seats, kitchen within here, large dining table for 12 people, and then an outside courtyard area as well. And this kind of area here, which is really interesting, probably one of my favorite spaces on the building, where this sits under a covered canopy, but you get morning sun, you're protected from prevailing westerly winds, and this sits by the edge of the kitchen. So in terms of a place for you to sit outside, have a kind of coffee in the morning, this is a really important one. And interestingly, you get really, really extreme sun angles, especially in the summer. So the sun sets right up here. So this area here is a lovely spot where you get sunsets that come right into this kind of courtyard. So the angles on this building were very much tied into the its location from a kind of planetary point of view, but also one from kind of more local kind of landscape with where it relates to kind of local landmarks and islands. This is then how we break the building up. So there was a lot of design work to kind of get to this point. This is a really simplified breakdown of the modules in terms of how they sit. So all of these areas were built in single pieces and essentially kind of fitted together like this. And a really key part of this, and this is a screenshot from my chat with Kenton when we were designing it, is it going to fit on the boat? So you can see here, so the door to the boat is 4.5 meters tight. And if the building didn't fit on the boat, then the building couldn't get to the islands. And seeing as the building was almost completely constructed in the factory, it's obviously pretty kind of critical what it did. So this is a really key part of the design process, which fed into all the development of the plan, the modules, the engineering, and how everything kind of broke down together. They also as well worked with a brilliant haulage company who were again like excellent problem solvers in terms of delivering this project. Just a word here, which I'll let Rob kind of touch on more, just around kind of embodied carbon. And we also did a series of interesting work working with, I used to work at Field & Co. Bradley for 10 years before we started Koto in 2019. And we did some work with them looking at how, this was an early carbon calculator. which they did around 2020, looking at the same building by building in essentially kind of a steel frame with brick versus an engineered timber frame with timber cladding, cellulose insulation, in terms of the overall kind of embodied carbon footprint of it. But I'll let Rob kind of touch base on that a little bit more. This is Welsh forestry. So this is where the timber came from. This is about an 1.5 hour drive from Kenton's factory. And I'm not going to dwell on these because Rob will go into a lot more detail, but these are the beams which were formed in order to form the modules of the building. We also had a really challenging environment to kind of work in, and there's also really challenging engineering which you need to kind of take into account when working in this way. So this is an image from another project, but these are the sections of building, and this is how they're installed as well. So not only do we need to design a building to withstand extremely high wind loading, we also need to design them to be craned, lifted, and transported as well. So there's a whole series of additional engineering work that needs to kind of go into developing a building that you can deliver in this way. So this was April. So this is basically the timber frame going on. So these were basically a series of portal frames. This is the center of the main living space. And this is one of the beams which is upside down. So this actually had there's a lot of engineering within this in terms of like additional steel, the bolts, the plates, how that fitted together. These essentially had to be moment connections up through and across the frame because of the way these had to act as independent modules, and then once they're stitched together they then act as a single whole as well. So and again, just in terms of like the complexity and really impressively that the joinery tolerances which Kenton's factory works to, we've never seen anyone else that kind of works at the same sort of level of kind of tolerance and craftsmanship, even for really simple things like the the kind of the primary structure of the building. Well, we'll touch base on that. And what we do in the factory is we take things to a much higher level of completion. So what you can see down here is splits in the modules. So these would basically be plastered up at the end of site. So once it's reached site, again, kind of roof lights, windows, everything's installed, parts of the kitchen. In this instance, we had one continuous floor. So the flooring actually went in after the building was installed. And also with this project, it probably left the factory a few weeks before it should have done because we had a specific window when we needed to transport the building. And in the end, the split of time on this was it ended up taking about 3 months for the final site finishing, which is done by kind of a team up on site. So this isn't quite the factory. It was more complete than this when it left the factory, but it gives you a good idea for how far we're taking buildings in this location. What's really interesting about this is that so this is the family. These are the pictures of them that they sent us when their house was traveling. It also travels much faster than you think. So it's typically going about sort of 50 miles an hour in these photos down here. But again, quite an amazing kind of part of their house arriving. Also, we needed police escorts and normal vehicles. These larger modules are kind of 4.2 meters wide. So they're obviously oversized loads. We also need to get a crane which came across from Inverness. So all of that needs to be coordinated at the same time in terms of logistics. And then what's amazing about this is, so we started essentially with a flat site in the morning. There is a longer story to this, which probably which Kenton might be able to tell, but getting everything there and coordinated at the same time was a huge kind of effort, and there was boats cancelled. People didn't arrive, but once they got started working through the process, the whole building was installed within 24 hours. So from a flat site, it's almost a complete building being there. And that is down to kind of craneage, hauliers, teams on site, teams in the factory, the design, the engineering, and all those other pieces that kind of work and fit together. And then this is the completed building once the cladding was all on. So it was transported without cladding, as you'll see from some of the other photos. And this is the kind of finished article. We also brought all the furniture up with it. So we kind of dressed it, arranged kind of photography. This is the inside in one of the bathrooms in the master suite. And what's really amazing is the views and the angles, the connection to the landscape and the wider area is really beautiful. I think it's a really beautiful property. I'm very proud of it. This is again one of the other views from the master bedroom. Interestingly, that's a full module width as well. So that kind of shows you the sort of space that you get. And then by putting multiple ones of these together with open sides, you can end up with much larger, more kind of usable spaces. The larger spaces are about kind of 13 meters by 6 meters that we have in this property. And again, the weather changes from kind of the sort of wild to sunny really quickly. And we also got some brilliant headlines like this one: a couple forced to transport 1 million dream home 600 miles to a remote Scottish island. Was not exactly true, but there was obviously some kind of truth in it. It also didn't cost 1 million. So that's it. We thought it was a really kind of interesting story, and very, very interesting, very kindly of them. They called the house Koto as well. So that was the TV license bill when we got there. And then last summer, we were invited back up as well. So we got to go back and see the house. So this is up there. Like, it's an amazing island where this is Kenton's son who kind of came up. So he brought his family up. We went up as well. And it's an amazing island where people have like lobster pots outside, so they'll kind of like bring them in and share them with everyone. They basically threw a big party for everyone that works on the house together. But yeah, so that's it. That's the kind of sort of quick story on the visuals of the house and our role in it. But I'll hand over to Rob now for a bit of the kind of the background and the lead in and the technical development of this.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Let me just share.
And just a reminder, people, to keep firing in those questions. They'll be answered in the Q&A and across the session. So please do keep putting in your lovely questions. Thank you.
So hopefully you can just see the presenter view rather than all the notes. But yeah, so we were really pleased to work on this project. It's kind of one bit of a lifetime project, really. It's an incredible site that has so many challenges, and yeah, so our involvement, as Theo said, was as kind of technical architects, and it built on a bit of a body of work that I've been involved in since 2007, which started within the Welsh School of Architecture, with organisations like Coed Cymru, who is a woodland management charity, and sort of backed by the Forestry Commission, Technology Strategy Board, and various different funding streams, which were really all focused around the use of homegrown timber. So homegrown timber in the particular context of Wales. And we began working with Kenton Jones, so father and son, actually, both named Kenton, and we now continue with Kenton Jr. And they've since branded as Unos Systems. So they really sort of came in right from the outset, looking at processing of timber and making prototypes, looking at different technologies with us for testing, and their background is actually in kind of high quality bespoke joinery products, so finishes, flooring, kitchens, furniture, and it really has come from the basis of that precise joinery background that has meant there's a whole breadth of knowledge and quality that's really helped the project along. And then ourselves, we're Cardiff-based architectural practice, a similar sort of timeline as Koto, actually, running for about 6 years. And we specialize in low carbon, low energy design, natural and timber construction methods, and design within kind of exceptional context. So we're specialist conservation architects, as well as sort of working across a lot of sectors. The kind of core of the project was thinking about the Welsh softwood product. So around 2006, 2007, the Forestry Commission changed their interest, really, in thinking about how to better use homegrown softwood. Primary product is Sitka spruce in Wales, which is a really fast-growing timber. It's where it's grown in its origins in Canada and North America. It's much slower growing, denser, and generally a better quality kind of timber. But in the UK, it grows very fast, which makes it quite low density. We have issues around what happens when they're on very exposed hillsides, etc., with branching and knots. and it's generally been used for quite low value products, including kind of fencing, pallets. Increasingly during the course of the project, it's become more of a valuable commodity for chipped boards, which is quite a big producer in Wales. We have quite a big producer in Wales. But in terms of construction, it's the kind of lowest grade carcassing material. So it's classed as C16, and it's rarely used in mainstream timber frame. There's been various different schemes along the way, which has kind of brought a bit of better attention to using homegrown, and of course, various changes to cost of imported materials have meant there's been different emphases on the homegrown product, but it's rarely kind of used in what we'd consider mainstream timber frame. So the starting point was, well, let's just swap it out. Let's use homegrown timber instead of imported, make open panel panelized systems out of it. And we were really sort of pushing water uphill with that idea. Some of the figures around timber frame, so it was around 14%, 2007. It's increased to around about 1 in 3 homes now in Wales, I think. But it actually, in terms of the wider context, timber is still a bit of a smaller part to play. So yeah, as a team, like really early on, we kind of set out with quite ambitious ideas around forestry and thinking about how Wales can develop its industries as well around the forestry sector. And it's certainly grown over the last sort of decade, with people such as Wood Knowledge Wales really picking up the agenda of Wales becoming this forest nation. That forestry and timber could become such a valuable resource and a kind of important economic driver for Wales, whilst also giving you all of the ambitions around decarbonisation and addressing the climate emergency. So it's kind of this really key opportunity. But tree planting is the core of that. So as I say, a lot of the Welsh stock is softwood. It's a really small contributor in terms of woodland coverage. It's only about 15% of the area of Wales, which is one of the lowest in Europe. During the time of this project, and in the context of a climate emergency, it's grown by about 6,000 hectares, which is a tiny amount. So yeah, it's the idea of how do you improve the woodland sector? How do you improve the planting of forestry when the end outcome is such a kind of low commodity value? You've got to improve the product that comes from it. Was part of our agenda. So we did that by really trying to understand what the context of Welsh industry is, but also trying to understand our material. What are the reasons why it's being used in such sort of limited value items? And we sort of developed a number of technical solutions. So we thought about embodied carbon, breathability, thinking about materials that could be alternatives to kind of petrochemical insulations, and develop a system which took all of these materials and really worked to their strengths, and could be manufactured in a relatively low value investment sort of. So the idea of doing glulam at scale was dismissed really early on because of the simple, the amount of investment required to get that kind of thing running. So core product is a large section timber beam. You saw some photos earlier. It combines 4 pieces of standard C16 spruce and makes a very strong section, but also one that's very stable, that resists some of the twist that's quite natural with Welsh spruce. This can be insulated. It can achieve really good open spans. It can also be portalized. So we looked a lot around moment connections and stability of those frames, and developed through a series of prototype buildings, really, the idea of post and beam frames, infill panels, cellulose materials, really high performance kind of fabrics. And then the ambition to go into volumetric kind of comes a little bit later, but certainly the idea to try to not rely on steel for stability was a really early kind of factor. It does come into the system in parts, but it's generally encapsulated. So we manage thermal bridging really well. And when it comes to volumetric, we're not immediately kind of steering towards steel as a kind of chassis or a stability mechanism. So we then developed this through a series of buildings. The first one was this classroom for the Gwent Wildlife Trust, which used the post and beam frame with, again, really large spans, or really good spans with a SIPS panel infill. Then a second project looked at how could we use an infill panel to span as a secondary item, again using homegrown spruce. So they were kind of really incremental developments with each building that we looked at. But a big kick on and a key driver for sort of the move for Kenton and Unos Systems was this project for the Isle of Anglesey County Council. We did 6 volumetric affordable homes, all through COVID. So this was a really kind of turbulent time, really. But the ambition to kind of go into volumetric was really all of those ideas around volumetric, bringing the supply chains closer, reducing waste, helping to develop local supply chains, but also the people you really depend on and know and trust, bringing all of those resources into a factory environment, and then also giving the ability to develop, to build in some really challenging environments, but giving it the security net of a factory environment to do most of that work. So this project, which was backed as one of the Innovative Housing Programme projects, meant that we could kind of push on into that. And again, the amount of advancement of like technical resolution through this was really amazing. We kind of tackled each pair of houses as another little research project in itself, and advanced a bit more with each one, and advanced a bit more how much work was done in the factory, how much was site-based, and really refined some of those items. And then that brought us to Koto, which by the time that we sort of the collaboration with Koto came along, I think that what Kenton was offering was already sort of exceptional. A sort of wholly timber-based volumetric system, really focused around the homegrown timber product and the homegrown supply chains, natural materials, recycled insulations, giving kind of really good energy performance, but then with the background of them being able to do everything to the interior, the finishes, to such a high standard, meant overall the kind of offer is I think fairly exceptional. There's a bit of data. It's really high performance. I think the form factor means that we were never really looking to go to a passive house certification sort of standard. That wasn't part of the agenda necessarily, but all of the kind of criteria that you would look for around air tightness and U values, thermal bridging is there. So I'm going to just now jump onto a little video of the clip. Oh, we're doing okay for time. So yeah. So the video is just 7 minutes. I say just 7 minutes. We'll talk over it a little bit, and it's a little bit rough and ready, but hopefully you get a bit of a picture of the process. and a bit some of the kind of environment that this is done in. So, you know, sort of the first thing to say really is that I think what's been exceptional about the R&D project is we've really developed close interactions with the forestry, and Theo showed some photos, like we can pinpoint where these trees came from. The stock can be established almost at standing stage, and we are like at that point where we can, you know, Kenton's going into the woodland and identifying the trees that he wants, and it's standing there ready for the right project to come along. Some of the points in this, it's assembled quite similar to a traditional site build. You know, you're making panels, but the key thing is this post and beam frame, which acts as stability, and then the use of glue. So you're able to bring diaphragming all the way through the outline of the you know, the 3D module. And then another key sort of development was how to lift these. So a lot of lifting in terms of volumetric is done as a harnessing from the underside, and it means then the junctions are all a little bit more complicated. And one of the things that was developed quite early on was a strategy to lift through the frame. So you're actually using the stiffness of the frame, but also meaning that the junctions are much more kind of closer tolerance. So the level of finish is again a much kind of greater achievement. So yeah, some of the modules being transported, they are, as Theo said, predominantly finished. The ones that are basically enclosed, 4 walls and a roof, were fully fitted out. Bathrooms installed, tiled. You know, plastered and decorated, with the amount of defects occurring on site sort of really low. I don't think there was any issues around transportation. Obviously, all of the wonderful scenery, it travelled by truck, then the ferry, which really governed the size of modules, and then you get to site and you hope everything's all arrives at the right time. And you know, Theo mentioned about the kind of the all of the planning that goes into getting these people here at the right time with the right plant, and it was exceptionally planned, but actually this is the delivery stage. And if you were having to do that on a building of this nature in this environment, it would be pretty much impossible, because everything has to come to the island really to be able to make it happen. So you can see, yeah, the lifting is all done from above. Triple glazed windows installed. It's battened, ready to receive finishes. The roof isn't on, so the first action is, I think, immediately on follow on from the installation is the roof. And one of the kind of the key points, which I might show you a little drawing of later, is this interaction with the ground. And it's a suspended timber floor, which for sort of the volumetric and prefabricated market is one of the challenges to overcome, is that junction with ground and making it feel like it still is embedded within the ground rather than sitting on top of, and is kind of feels temporary. Whereas the detailing of this and part of, I think, the design objectives that we were trying to deliver on, so those early images where the building is kind of trying to grow out of the ground and really bedded in, was all around these junctions, getting these junctions really precise, being able to continue cladding down to meet the ground, which from a ground worker point of view requires a specific tolerance, which I think is part of the learning process. We've really had to develop that quality of ground worker delivery as well to match the tolerances that Kenton's able to work to. You can see then a module here, which is one of the open-sided modules, fully loaded with furniture, cladding, materials, everything came across on those boats in as minimal a trip as possible, including people. Yeah, as I say, all of the finishes, the utilities, the fridges, freezers, the works, didn't it? It all came across.
There was no people in the modules, to be clear, though.
Sorry. But I don't know if you can get a picture from this as well, but the wind in some of these clips is just incredible. So they're trying to navigate this really close tolerances. So they're coming into a junction around about 10-15 mil abutment to the next module, with this blowing around in wind and rain and all sorts of things, really. So, and with a really tight window on that crane had to get back on the next ferry, so there was no time to dwell, really. So yeah, I think Kenton had a few stressful moments. So yeah, that image sort of shows one of the details that's quite an interesting challenge. You start to get a picture from this, the level of finish. So this is the day after, effectively the day after installation, with the build, all the modules in place. So 7 modules, 2 making up the double height element, ready for external finishes. And then this is a kind of clip very nearing completion, just the landscaping works. And then we'll stop there. Yeah, so there's a couple of technical slides. Shall we just go into doing a few questions? I feel like
yep. If it's okay, we'll just jump into a few questions, and maybe those slides will come up during the discussion. In any case, I probably expect. So I'm going to do my best to string together a few of the questions we've received across the session. The first one I wanted to get into was actually around procurement. So we've had a couple of questions about sort of the manufacturer, and in terms of, I just want to talk a little bit about working in terms with, when you're working with modular systems and sort of volumetric sort of type systems, how important is that early engagement, and how did it happen in this project? At what point did you guys start engaging with the manufacturer?
That really early, like pre-planning. So that was during the concept design stage. We were working with Kenton. Like, so we'd already been kind of working together on other projects. But for this one, yeah, it was done at really kind of like early stage. And it's the only, like, there are other projects where we work with multiple kind of manufacturers, and we will work through kind of a tender process. This project specifically, in terms of like the level of kind of like quality which can be delivered by one manufacturer and to kind of deliver the logistics required for, we work with Kenton just with this project from the outset, and we work through like early stage costing as well. So as you work kind of like through the process, we kind of benchmarked where we were as we developed the kind of through the process. So we did costing at stage 2, stage 3, and then a full costing at stage 4, which is essentially the contract price from there.
Yeah.
I think it's possible to do volumetric without sort of bedding in the system, like what's in the wall, but actually the understanding around, particularly around understanding around transportation and route from factory to site is what governs the design process. So those rules have to govern it, and how it's then made might be a little bit more flexible if there's, as you say, you've got a number of different methods of delivering. But you've got to do it, right at the beginning. Yeah.
I guess it probably leads into a bit of some points around the environment. So obviously you're considering the environment on site in terms of the architectural design, but you probably had to consider the environment right from the factory through to the transport and through to the inside. Can you just talk about how that's impacted the design and the design process?
From like a sustainability point of view, Liam?
Just from an overall, like in terms of when you were getting these components and stuff, you had to consider how they were being transported onto site, and I guess how that's impacted the very way you put this building together.
Yeah, definitely. And there's one of the questions there was about like questions around kind of like cladding as well, and that's so there's some parts about the delivery of the building, and a lot of what like our ambition for the building was it to be kind of really clean, really sculptural. And there's a lot of work in there as well in terms of like hidden gutters, hidden downpipes, all of the kind of, the bits that you see traditionally kind of on buildings are hidden away. And that work took a long time, both from a design point of view, but also from like a site and construction point of view as well. So where we have continuous overhangs that span like multiple modules, and it needs to be coordinated with the roof and the cladding and those other elements, there was a decision made that those bits were better to be done on site rather than in the factory. So there's a kind of like a division which is kind of like discussed and talked through between us as kind of design architects, Rob as technical architects, and Kenton as the manufacturer and the builder as well. So a really kind of like collaborative process. It also affects the overall kind of timeline as well. And what was nice about this project is that the client was really involved through all of this process. They took like a real interest in it as well. So we'd have monthly technical design meetings with Rob's team and with us and with them, just running through all the design coordination that we're doing. Even things like windows took just a huge amount of time to coordinate. And they were actually from an Austrian company. But just to get them coordinated with cladding board set out with structure. And we also had to work through the Scottish warrant system as well, which is a bit different to the rest of the UK, where everything needs to be kind of pre-designed and signed off as well. So that kind of impacted some of the sort of design time. But yeah, it's really kind of like collaborative, that process. You couldn't do it without a really closely kind of integrated team.
We did have a question like, was there a dry run in the factory before you transported and sort of took it off site?
Yeah, so some of the modules were kind of constructed side by side, so almost as one. The factory has a series of overhead cranes in it, so they can be lifted and moved into position. But obviously, there's things like the two-story section is taller than the internal cranes.
I just wanted to show, I don't know if you can see that this is the. Have you got the PowerPoint with an image of the?
We can see that.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, so there's the three modules that make up four modules, but the three primary ones that make up the main open living space was all assembled as in the arrangement it would take on site, and that was like really important dry run, as you call it, to see how the overhangs were going to work. And there's a number of angles there that are all kind of coming together into that moment. So it was really valuable. Although I think what you saw an image earlier on of the structural model as well is that it was all tested in terms of the BIM model. So everything was modeled in 3 dimensions as well. So I think with that and that leading then to the CAM. Drawings and fabrication information meant that it was pretty well tested before it was actually it ever got to site.
Yeah, and just in terms of like again, like, so one thing you guys have done which is really interesting here is those sort of those open-sided modules, which has allowed you to treat that really quite large open sort of space in the center of the building, which seems a bit different, or challenges some of the preconceptions around modular design. So has that always been a part of your work, or was it sort of quite specific to this build?
Yeah, definitely. And like a lot of that is kind of, it's like, modular construction and volumetric modular construction in some instances, can look like a series of stacked boxes and kind of put together. We approach it as kind of architecture first that needs to deliver for its site and for its clients. That's our kind of approach to it. And there was many iterations of how those modules worked and fitted together in order to kind of put those kind of spaces together. And also it's challenging as well. Like the way that we did the initial kind of concept design was like, can we do this weird triangular module in this corner because that gets us this big long space? So there's bits in there where we're kind of working through like with the factory and with the designers, like, is that going to fit on a lorry? Is it going to balance funny? There's things like that we kind of need to work through kind of right from the outset. So yeah, there's a lot of work that we do and we've developed kind of over the years in terms of how we design those types of spaces to to really work.
And I can see you do quite a lot of work internationally, Theo. Is this do you usually was Welsh timber quite specific to this project, or is it something you work with?
Yeah. So interestingly, we work on a series of different projects, sometimes as kind of just designers, but what we also do is we look for like really exceptional factories and partners, and that's part of our kind of business development. So finding those right partners allows us to kind of work internationally through kind of similar processes as well. So yeah, so we work in kind of like, different regions and in different countries. But with all of that, at the start of any of that process, it's a similar thing. So it's like the question is like, what's the team you're going to assemble to deliver this project if you want to deliver it as a in a volumetric way? And it has kind of certain advantages that you can do that for remote sites, speed of construction, and it depends what the kind of project typology that you're trying to deliver.
Yeah. So could you just clarify so this is a question around sort of there's the architect and the technical architect on this sort of project. Do you guys just want to clarify quickly your role in terms of this construction, this build?
Yeah, so we were kind of like, well, if you take it by ROVA work stage, the basic split is we were kind of up to stage 3, and then Rob was from stage 4 and construction. That's the simple one, but there was a lot of overlap in between as well, between all of us to get it right and delivered in the right way as well. So that's the kind of simple one, but there's probably the split of it will probably be like kind of 80-20 us in the concept design stage, and then 80-20 Rob in the latter design stage.
And so do you mind if I just ask a bit of a selfish question around sort of particularly around the use of like homegrown timber and homegrown species? Like in terms of obviously there's C16 on this project, C18. There's a bit of a perception in the UK that it has to be C24. So people are often sort of, putting, specifying for this highest grade, but there's a lot you can achieve in terms of, Rob, can you just talk a little bit about the potential for like homegrown timber in terms of some of your work?
That's been one of the biggest barriers to its use in standard, in typical construction, is that a lot of engineers will default to C24 in the design work, in the calculation work, and you inadvertently just discount the Welsh product. So I think that there's definitely a kind of education process on recognizing that C16 is a acceptable standard structurally. That if we want to use homegrown, we have to be recognizing what the product is that's coming out of the mills. If we were to, we could specify and we could grade to C24 some spruce, but the amount of reject out of that process would be inefficient, so we don't. So there's been projects where there's been some special grading around around using homegrown timber. So yeah, I think it's partly an education process, and then we found that generally it is quite difficult to get people to move just with a simple substitution, going from C24 imported to a C16 on a large scale basis. There has to be a driver, and there has been in recent years, whether it's innovative housing program that's called for Welsh timber to be used in a Welsh delivery, but it's not difficult. If we're using Welsh timber, we continue to invest in the Welsh resource, the Welsh forestry, and we hopefully end up with a better stock coming out of it in the end as well.
And I should add to that, actually, there are C16 span tables available to download from Timber Development UK. So all those architects, engineers, anyone interested, please do get online and download those, because there's a lot we can do and we can achieve, as has been shown for this project today. We are out of time. Rob, Theo, is there anything else you'd like to add just to close this off? All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate everyone who tuned in, and of course, Rob and Theo for sharing their great knowledge. Just quickly, I'm just going to note that we do have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 11th of June. Haileybury SciTech. So please do tune in on Wednesday, 11th of June, and do not forget to enter the Outer Woods. So if that's everything, I'm just going to leave it there. All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much.